According to this, we're live. According to this, we are live. Yes, I repeated myself, but you never know when the live stream really started. Anyway, I'm gonna flash this video into existence. We're gonna big bang this thing into existence, and boom! There we go. Flash of light and fully formed universe. And just last night we watched an episode of Star Trek Discovery, also known as STD because it's a fungal infection on the genitals of Star Trek. Yeah, it is a fungal infection of sorts. That's how the spore drive works, you know. Here I am going to talk about stuff, and it's the daylight hours, so to help me stay awake, caffeine. Caffeine. This one's Rockstar Burner. This time. I remember years ago giving somebody a drive to work, and I drank energy drinks, she drank energy drinks, and she was talking about, I believe it was her grandmother she was traveling with. She was talking about having traveled somewhere with her grandmother, a family trip of some sort, I guess, somewhere, and drinking the Rockstar Burner. The cans were pretty much the same back then. Them going past the cops and thinking, you know, from a distance, because energy drinks were fairly new back then, as were these. From a distance, it probably would have looked like she was drinking, I think it was Labatt's Blue, had like a blue can, kind of like this, you know, some sort of booze, you know. From a distance, you know, going past the cops, just thinking, oh, well, this might look like booze if I'm drinking it. And sweet merciful fuck, that was way back in 2007. That's over a fucking decade ago. God damn. Time has passed. But anyway, yeah. I think it was at a distance. Those cans kind of resembled a Labatt's can. I think that was the one. Some sort of booze. Anyway, I started the video. I'm caffeinated enough to talk. Here I am. Even spent a minute playing peekaboo with the camera because we're going for another episode, so get your card stamped. We're going for another episode. And, yeah. And if this was a pre-recorded one, as I always point out, if this was a pre-recorded video, there's a good chance I would have done an intro with a flying car or a car. So anyway, here we go. Yeah, there we go. Flying car, video started. The caffeine's starting to kick in. I've scanned the internet. Not too much strange and creepy activity going on. No chronally displaced weirdness. Okay, that'll probably build up later. But hey, it didn't short this thing out. This thing, you know, started to work and we even properly turned off. Yeah. That's all fine and good. And I'm just rambling, and I'm going to talk about Star Trek and Star Trek Discovery. And yes, I said and Star Trek Discovery, not including Star Trek Discovery. And yes, I know it's all Star Trek because Star Trek is a copyright, and CBS with a little bit of Paramount in there too, which kind of gets split, which I'm not going to get into, but CBS owns the copyright, so whatever CBS says is Star Trek, and but I'm going to say and Star Trek Discovery, separating the two, because does anybody really think of Star Trek Discovery as real Star Trek? Yeah, I know there's some people, and you're right to think of it as Star Trek. It is branded as such. For example, if someone were to get an actual branding iron and brand the word goat on a cow's ass, then that cow is branded a goat, you know. If you were to stick your brand name logo, if you were Ford and you tried to stick your Ford logo on a Honda Civic that you didn't even rebadge under an agreement from Honda, then you technically stuck your name on it. I'm sure Ford would love to be able to pretend they made the Honda Civic because, you know, Ford is Ford. And the Honda Civic's actually pretty cool. Well, they're kind of low to the ground. Other than that, they're kind of cool. But, yeah. So, anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, I could also talk about the Orville. And I will mention the Orville. Last night's episode of the Orville was a repeat. The repeat of the Identity. That was the word that wasn't popping to mind. Identity Part 1. And actually, I didn't get a chance to react to it, but my last video live stream, I actually got a comment. And from, I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name, but I'm horrible with pronouncing names and words and really anything. But Yang Heo commented, the Orville episode with the time capsule was one of the best, and I agree. It was one of the best. But then again, I would also I'd qualify my own personal opinion on that one as being all of them, almost all the episodes of Orville are one of the best because it's got an impressively consistent quality control. Yeah, I worded that awkwardly. There's impressive quality control with the Orville. I think the only episode I thought that was kind of weak was the first episode. And it had a great setup, getting all the characters together. I just wasn't a big fan of that time-altering device, the device that sped up the flow of time for objects in it. I had issues of cognitive dissonance on how that device actually worked. I had issues with that. But it's not that I have a problem with time travel, time dilation, time-altering fields, or any of those concepts. I overall had some issues with the overall plot to the first episode, but I actually liked the story that they had that got all the characters together. So the actual first episode of the Orville I thought was the weakest, and that was just uphill from there. And people always compare it to Star Trek Discovery because the two shows started around the same time. The Orville has the spirit of Star Trek. Discovery has the name of Star Trek stamped on its ass. Yeah, so the two always get compared. Now, while I thought the Orville's first episode was its weakest, I thought Star Trek Discovery's first two-part episode was some of its best until one or two episodes of season 2. That said, the first two episodes were pretty horribly bad for Discovery. I mean, you had, I want to compliment Discovery every chance I get because there's always so many bad things. I want to point out stuff that I actually enjoyed in it because it's Star Trek, so I'm going to watch it. And that's what CBS is banking on. They stuck the name Star Trek on something. They're banking on the idea you're going to want to watch Alpha Canon Star Trek. And what Alpha Canon means is, you know, the stuff that makes it on TV and screen, the movies and the TV shows, is the material that's going to affect all other Star Trek materials. They're going to make the stories in the novels and the comics bend and warp to meet whatever happens in the TV shows and the movies. Excuse me. So whatever version of Star Trek might be your favorite, even if you prefer reading it in the form of a novel, and it's what's on television is very important. I actually read I didn't think their books were perfect, but I read that one of the authors of a lot, I almost pronounced it authors, one of the authors of some of the Star Trek novels didn't watch the show. And I was like, what? Somebody had made the comment that they did a great job of filling in the gaps of what happened between the shows and how she fleshed out the characters. And the person said that they didn't, and that the characters, they could actually picture the characters being written in a way that they felt like the characters they saw on screen. And then she responded to it by saying, well, I don't watch the show. I think it was a reference to her writing a Deep Space Nine story or the novelization of a Deep Space Nine episode. And I'm like, what? You write Star Trek books? I mean, I didn't necessarily have that opinion of her writing myself, I just thought that she was a competent writer and made some good books. And I don't think she stood out as my favorite, but I definitely didn't dislike her work. But when she said that, I was like, what? You, your job is writing Star Trek books. You've written a lot of Star Trek books. Wouldn't you want to uh, get a good concept of the material you're writing for? You know, take an hour out of your week, maybe 2 hours if you count both Deep Space Nine and Voyager. You know, take 2 hours out of your week and watch Star Trek. And there's the telephone. And I'm not bothering with the phone right now. I don't think it'll be anything important at this time of day anyway. All right. If it was important, this other phone right here, they'd probably find another way to send a message. No, based on the time of day now. Anyway, yeah, distracted by the telephone. Screw you, telephone! No, but that was a thought I actually had, was somebody who wrote Star Trek novels didn't watch the show, and I was like, I don't know, it just seemed like, you know, if you're writing Star Trek novels, you should take the time to watch the show. You know, it could help with consistency. But anyway, actually I still got that setting there. I'm gonna put that away. That piece of cardboard I was using for my game of peekaboo with the camera earlier. There we go. Just put that away. Put it back in my wallet and put the wallet away. Alright, so what was I talking about? The Orville. Yeah, the Orville was great, and, you know, I recommend, I'm just going to lean on the edge of the screen here. There we go. Because, you know, standing takes energy, and I don't have enough caffeine in my system for that. But, yeah, the Orville was great, the repeat, as was the episode, the last new episode that we saw. Yeah, the time capsule episode. It had an awful lot of special aspects and qualities to it. Like, a lot of stuff to think about. The idea of being remembered long after you're dead, because if you're a sentient being, you should be fairly aware that time keeps ticking forward, and sooner or later, if not natural decay itself, eventually your corpse is going to stop processing your experiences. You will eventually face something. You will eventually face the worst possible fate. It's coming for us all. It's oblivion. And even if you can't continue to process the world, you know, maybe you can be remembered. And, you know, there's, you know, through all your little messages and pictures that might be in one of these little devices, you know, there's probably a lot of slices of life inside any recording device that, or any device that you use as both recording and storing messages and or pictures, video clips, lots of slices of life in there. It's one of the reasons why whenever I do videos, I like to have as much little background details and stuff that's going on around me as I can, because it's like, I'm just capturing a little bit of my world and putting it in the video, even if I'm talking about something that would seem really off topic. Alright, so, yeah, talking about the Orville for a second there. And the most recent episode of Star Trek Discovery, I made some notes, but I forgot them in the other room, so I'm not going to go get them. I'm just going to comment on what's still in my mind from watching the episode. And the first time I watched it, I started to fall asleep near the end. And missed a few bits here and there, but it was on twice, so I watched the second airing of it later that night, which was technically this morning, because we've already passed over midnight by the second time it aired. Let's see, the Space Channel aired it the first time. In my time zone, it was 9 o'clock, I believe. And then the second time, I think it was 2 a.m., so 9 p.m. and then again on 2 a.m., and the second time I got all the way through it. And it wasn't that it bored me to sleep. I was legitimately tired. Was it a good episode? Well, when I stop and think about it, just about everything stupid about the episode had been achieved. Let me rephrase that. just about everything significantly stupid about the episode by Star Trek Discovery standards had been achieved in the previous episode. So I think most of my complaints I could pin on the previous episode. This episode didn't fix them by shaking up our expectations. Excuse me. I'm trying to think. Oh, there was a line in it I liked. I don't know if I'm remembering it clearly enough to quote it exactly. But the Empress Giorgio? The way they pronounce it, I'm not sure if it's pronounced Giorgio or Giorgio. But it's not Georgia. Which... Terran... The Lost in the Prime Universe Terran Empire. Terran Empire. Terran Empress. For fuck's sake. I just can't say words. And this can is almost empty. And I might have to double dose my energy drink to just function. I don't know. The Terran Empress herself. The character that I liked the Prime Universe version of. Now we get an evil version of her. When she threatened, what's his name? Ash Tyler? Was that his name? Or was it Ash Ketchum? I know it's not Ash Ketchum, but I suppose it would be insulting Pokemon to... you know, I was never the biggest Pokemon fan, but I kind of liked the cartoon and, you know, the being the late 90s, you know, back in the late 90s, I remember watching the cartoon and, anyway, the Empress insulted Ash Ketchum. Yeah, that's how I'm going to word it now. Or not insulted, threatened him. Basically told him that if he betrays her, she will live long enough to hunt him down and kill him. Something along that line. And I actually liked his response. Kill him slowly. He said something about, I've been killed before. All you're saying to me is, this time I'll get the scenic version. I actually liked that line. I gotta say, I liked that line. That was a line I liked. You know, somebody does that bullshit where they're threatening to kill somebody, and you know, no matter how much bullshit his backstory is, it's there. It's part of the story. It's already there. I would say this was, you know, referencing, you know, everything he's been through, you know, in this manner. I actually like that moment. I don't like his backstory leading up to this episode. There was way too much nonsense and bullshit in season 1 and what we've gotten from season 2. He's not a character I look forward to seeing more of, but I loved that line when she threatened to kill him and he basically told her all she's threatening him with is getting the scenic version. I liked that moment, you know. That was a good moment. That was a good moment. Yeah. Credit to the character and the writers who managed to write the good line for that character. We got a whole good line in that episode. I also noticed... I don't know, this is not really breaking the fourth wall, but doesn't it kind of seem like they're leaning on the fourth wall a little bit when they call their universe the Prime Universe? Just saying. I mean, it could be worse. They could have called it the Real Universe. You know, I've seen that in TV shows and cartoons before, you know, and stuff like that, where they'd say, now we're back to the real universe, you know. But I suppose that universe is real to them, the characters that left the universe, so you can kind of understand it. But when she refers to this universe that she's stuck in now as the Prime Universe, I'm like, are we having a translation error here? Because, what? Why? why would she of all people? Because it was the character from the Mirror Universe. I'm pretty sure that said Prime Universe. And even if somebody else, what? I mean, it makes sense to us, the audience, to call one of the universes the Prime Universe. But when the characters start doing it, I don't know. It kind of reminds me of the episode of Futurama. And although this was a completely different situation, but in the category of naming universes, I suppose everybody would want their own home universe to be thought of as Universe 1, because it's Universe 1 to them. They had the characters from Futurama meeting an alternate universe version of themselves, and they're like, this is Universe 1 or Universe 2 or something like that. It's like, hey, why do we get called Universe 2 or something like that? Or Universe A and Universe B, or stuff like that. And somebody was like, no way, this universe feels more like the B universe. What are you doing calling our universe the B universe? It was something like that, they said. And then they agreed on one group was going to call their universe Universe 1, and the others were going to call their universe Universe A, and I liked that. I just thought that was a good moment of them squabbling over who gets to consider their universe the number 1 or the A universe, because, if you use lettering, the A universe is the number 1 universe, and if you use numbering, then 1 is the A universe. And I'm spending way too much time on that thought, but I like that moment in Futurama. But it just really stood out to me when the characters called the universe the Prime Universe. Is she going to call her universe the Mirror Universe? To the people in the Mirror Universe, shouldn't the Prime Universe be the Mirror Universe to them? Because it mirrors them with a... But then again, if you saw a version of your universe and the morals were inverted in a way that people were more moral, would you actually view that as a reversal, or would your own philosophy cause you to think of it as just I'm not even sure what to call it, just an absurd... Yeah, if you don't share somebody's morals, you often tend to dismiss, well, I'm not saying you personally, but I'm using the term when people dismiss somebody else's moral standards, they usually just dismiss it as a bad philosophy. So I'm not sure, but it's just kind of... I thought it was awkward when they actually used the term Prime Universe, so take what you will of it. Yeah. Oh, they addressed the whole neural signature thing. Now it's a mitochondria DNA. Now I'm pretty sure, I'm almost certain, when they talked about realizing who the Red Angel was, and they said that it was Michael Burnham, and I'm sure they said it was her neural signature. Neural something or other, okay? Like as in neurological, as in mental waves of thought, as if it was like a reading of someone's mind, like a signature that you could tell that something is someone's mind. I'm pretty sure they said neural, as in neurological. In this episode, they said that the mistake made the mistake was made because they were detecting mitochondrial DNA. And I'm like, the fuck kind of reasoning is that? First off, they're right. First off, if they said that somehow that this signature was a mitochondrial DNA scan, which, if you had just one scan, I don't know why that would be it. But if that's what they had said, I'd be like, yeah, that actually works. That works. It is true most human beings get most of their mitochondria directly from their mother, and your mitochondria have their own unique DNA. And to anybody who doesn't know what mitochondria are, they're basically the real world equivalent to midichlorians in Star Wars. In fact, when people went on complained and whined, "Oh my, they ruined the Force by making it midichlorians. The Force used to be like life force flowing through the galaxy." No. When they said midichlorians, it seemed as though they were talking about something kind of like mitochondria. Perhaps it's an alien variation of mitochondria, or perhaps it's a special type of mitochondria, perhaps something along that lines. But basically, they were talking about an organelle kind of like mitochondria. And mitochondria are exactly what gives you biological energy. So if your mitochondria could tap into an extra dimensional field, if your galaxy had this extra dimensional field, and your mitochondria could become a variation of mitochondria, perhaps called midichlorians, and tap into this, you would be literally tapping into a field of life force itself. Which, that actually worked out surprisingly well. When they first said midichlorians, I thought, what nonsense is this? And then later somebody wrote on the internet, I think it sounds as though they're referencing mitochondria. And as soon as I read that, I was like, that made sense. That in an absurd science fiction universe that has something like the Force that actually works. But that said, your mitochondria in real life, and as far as we can tell in Star Trek, they're basically just what provide you with biological energy. They take in oxygen and glucose, and they produce a substance called ATP. There's a process that goes on in there. There's some proton pumping action. By proton pumping, that means, be like a hydrogen ion, a positive hydrogen ion, proton pumping action, creating an electrical gradient or voltage and life force energy, blah, 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 whatever. Oxygen and glucose go in, and biological energy comes out. That's your mitochondria. Not only do they play an important role in all oxygen-breathing life, not just animals, but even plants have mitochondria. Just in the case of plants, they have both mitochondria and chloroplasts. I'm not sure if I pronounced chloroplast right or not, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Basically, mitochondria are a real thing, and you do get most of your mitochondria from your mother. Yeah, the sperm is a pretty active cell, so it probably has, a fair number of mitochondria in it. Some of your mitochondria might come over on the sperm when you're made, but most of your mitochondria are right there, and you get them from your mother. Yeah, I think it's like over 90% of your mitochondria come from your mother. And they're just little organelles that live within your cells that evolved a very long time ago when one type of cell was looking for energy, another cell was looking for energy, one that was capable of using oxygen to make energy, made all kinds of energy, but could use a safer place to live, got eaten by another cell, but survived in that cell and produced energy for that cell. And there's like a symbiosis which allowed for the evolution of oxygen-breathing life and multicellular life. Mitochondria are a fascinating and interesting thing, and why in the hell would they confuse a neural signature with mitochondrial DNA? There's no reason to connect them other than the fact, everybody has mitochondria, and they're responsible for all of our biological energy. So I suppose that's something new that this episode added that was stupid, but it was their way of explaining the stupid real revelation at the end of the last episode that it was Michael Burnham's mother. Burnham's? Burnham's. How do you pronounce her name? I'm not sure. I don't really care. Okay, I don't care. I heard her name said enough times. I'm not sure. A lot of people call her Mikey Sue because the character's a bit of a Mary Sue, but her first name is Michael. I've heard her called Mikey Spock because she's Spock's surrogate sibling. I just don't care. I mean, but I mean that when the plot reveal was her mother, I thought, well, this is not. I mean, in and of itself, this is bad, but it could lead to another reveal that the Red Angel was her mother, but some of the time travel incidences could have been her mother giving her the suit, and that could explain the whole neural signature thing that the whoever got at whatever time, and it's a convoluted mess. And I was thinking that maybe at some point the time travel suit will be given to the Michael character, and thus why they get the wrong character from this. But no, they explained it away in this episode that the reason why we made a mistake about the neural signature was well, it's your mother, and the reason why it was confusing is mitochondrial DNA. You get most of your mitochondrial DNA from your mother because that's where most of your mitochondria come from. Only a little bit of mitochondria come over on the sperm, so you get most of your mitochondria from your mother, not from your father. He just gives you a sperm cell, and that doesn't have that much mitochondria in it. So of course we're going to confuse a neural signature with your mother's, because of course your mind is going to be just like your mother's. It's just going to it's just going to radiate a signature of energy because. No, this is some really bad technobabble. I mean, that was a bad excuse. I mean, oh damn you, Discovery. Ah, my. So yeah, I actually, as I stop and think about it, this episode had some stupid stuff in it, but I think most of it was carried over from plot reveals from the previous episode. And yeah, there you go. There you have it. That's this episode. This is just another brick in the wall of a poop wall made for labeled Star Trek Discovery. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to call it. It's another link in the chain of stupid. Yeah. So the most recent episode of Star Trek Discovery. I don't know. I don't know what to say about it. You know what? It could have been worse. There were a lot of indications of things that could have gone worse in the series. I mean, Spock might have actually been as bad as he looked in the previews for this season. The actor who is playing Spock, he's doing a good job. He's not been given the best scripts, but there's that. Excuse me. Yeah, straight up, that's my thoughts. I'm just doing this off the top of my head, just whatever comes to mind about the episode. And the episode was more the same, and the same was bad. The same was bad. I think you're starting to get hints as to what they're going to do to say that to line up with canon, as they say, to line up with the pre-existing continuity of Star Trek and make things look more like Star Trek. And I'm not all that overly impressed. This weird enemy, which, by the way, they have figured out how to tell when a hologram is just a hologram because this thing hasn't been faking heat signatures properly. this holographic whatever monstrosity is going to try and infiltrate Starfleet because it can be turn into a hologram of a hologram of anyone. So that's going to be the reason for getting rid of the holographic technology all over the place, I think. Now, first off, you don't need that reason. You just don't. You don't need it. You just get rid of it. You get rid of it. Here's how you look. If they wanted to fix why the hell they thought it was ever a good idea to make Star Trek look like that in the first place is beyond me. They should have known not to do that. Just don't do that. When somebody was like, well, let's make the bridge look like this, and we'll make holograms all over the place, and someone probably said, well, that doesn't match the aesthetics of Star Trek. They don't do that in Starfleet vessels. And then somebody was like, fire that man! But he told the truth. That doesn't match the aesthetics of Star Trek. Fire that person too. It's just kind of wrong. And it also was kind of convoluted. As far as I'm concerned, they didn't do a great job of planning the whole damn thing out. And, but at no point do I look at those holograms and think that's too advanced for the era. It definitely does not look like it's more advanced than Star Trek The Next Generation. Straight up, it's not more advanced than Star Trek The Next Generation. They might not have holograms appearing everywhere in Next Generation like that. But that doesn't mean they couldn't if they wanted to. They're just smart enough not to want to. In Deep Space Nine, I remember they were setting up some sort of holographic communicator on the Defiant. And it seemed like a new thing to them, a new novelty. But it shouldn't be treated as nothing that could have ever been done before. It should be just viewed as something that normally wasn't done. Next Generation, as early as the first season, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure there were a couple times, sometimes you'd see somebody just pick up like a little item and you could turn on like a hologram. It would be like a holographic display of something that somebody could watch, or a holographic picture of somebody. This was not technology on par with the holodeck, and it obviously didn't require any amazing special holographic generators. But they didn't have holograms all over the place. And when you can't, like, for example, the Doctor and Voyager, they couldn't just project him outside of the sickbay, or the holodeck before they had the mobile emitter, but that's a special type of hologram. That's like the holodeck grade holograms. I mean, Data had a little portrait, a holographic portrait of Tasha Yar, and it required almost nothing to generate it. It was a very small device. And while somebody might react to me thinking about this in Next Generation as, well, I mean, that's all fine, but that's 100 years later. And true, but I'm referring to the aesthetics here. It's clear that by the time period of Next Generation, they could have set up Discovery-style holograms everywhere on the bridge, everywhere in anybody's quarters, but they didn't. They didn't do it because it kind of comes off as aesthetically stupid. I'm pretty sure there's one time when they're talking in Picard's ready room, and I think they only did it like once, and there's like a holographic projection comes up over the table, the conference room table. And I forget if it's like a planet and a starship or something like that, and they do it like once. And it doesn't look horrible, but it is kind of like a semi-transparent, ghostly hologram. Nothing compared to the holodeck, just something that's meant to be an image that they brought up. And they could have done that all over the ship if they wanted with the technology of the time. And I would assume long before that. They just didn't. They just didn't install that sort of thing all over the ship because it's, well, to me it comes off as like a novelty. It doesn't come off as something professional. In the limited form that it was used in Next Generation, it seemed appropriate. And again, when I say holograms, I'm not talking about holodeck grade holograms. I'm not talking about Doctor on Voyager level holograms. I'm talking about, you know, the little ghostly images. And I'll use the example again, such as the holographic portrait of Tasha Yar. And there were lines in Voyager that referenced holography like that had existed in the time period of Kirk, you know, hundreds of years ago. It was in its infancy compared to what they had at that day, but they had it back then. So, the technology of the time, I'm absolutely sure that if you stop and think about it reasonably, there's absolutely no reason why somebody couldn't hook up a communication system to a holographic generator of some sort that could produce those stupid little ghostly images. As far as I'm concerned, that matches the technological advancement of the time that Discovery takes place in, just shortly before Star Trek the original series. I have no problem with the capability of doing that. I have a problem with the fact they're doing it, especially as much as they are. I think it's absurd. Like, I don't think it's too advanced. I just think it's too convoluted. And when you think about it, the people who are having their hologram generated or projected into the other room, and when they act like they're seeing things in the room and setting down on things in the room and stuff like that, you have to wonder, you know, what are they really doing? And it's just convoluted to even try to think of what they're trying to portray. But someone somewhere must have like a holographic booth that's showing them the room that they're looking around in, because I'm pretty sure there were times where the holographic image was like looking around. But why? It's to me, it seems like a very sloppy, awkward, and displeasing interface. And when I think about it, turn around and there's Captain Crunch on the view screen, so to speak. You know, you have a nice image on a screen, neatly positioned. There they are, the person you're talking to. That makes sense. It seems proper and efficient for a Starfleet vessel, you know, the sort of organization that Starfleet in Star Trek is. Like, it seems appropriate for people to be talking on a fucking view screen as for communication. The holograms seem like an absurd novelty. And everybody knows why they're there. Is they did this in Star Wars, and these people are trying to ruin, well, I wouldn't say ruin, they're trying to degrade Star Trek by making it more like Star Wars. But I don't like it when people say that it's too advanced. As far as I'm concerned, it's not too advanced. It's too convoluted. It shouldn't be done. I very strongly believe they should not be designing the ships like that it doesn't fit when people complain about it. But as technological advancements go, they would have been capable of this in the time period of Next Generation for sure, whether or not you think they could have done it in the original series era. Personally, I think they would have been capable of pulling off something like this in the time period of Enterprise. They just had the common sense not to do it. Because these are not advanced holograms by any Star Trek The Next Generation standard. So, but anyway, how I think they should have handled it when they came up with all these holograms, and then we're surprised when people are like, "Well, this doesn't look like Star Trek. This is wrong. Starfleet vessels don't look like that. There's too many holograms." What I would have done if I was the showrunner, straight up what I would have done, I would have said, "Okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna fix this. We're gonna fix this good, all right? What we're gonna do is we're gonna portray no other ship is having this except for a few vessels set it up as an experiment. They're gonna comment on how, most of the captains of Starfleet are gonna comment on how much they hate it, and it's gonna go away. And there's going to be some admirals using this for communication, and because the Discovery is supposed to be like this ultra-advanced, nonsensical bullshit ship, We're going to keep it on the Discovery. Some admirals will communicate with them this way, but most people will communicate on a regular view screen, and this will be unique to the Discovery because it's a weird-ass experimental ship. And just try to never use it again. And if they want to stay consistent with the fact they introduced it, have a couple admirals communicate with them using the absurd thing. And then maybe, you know, later one of the admirals who had been communicating that way will start communicating on a view screen, and somebody will make a comment, you're not using the holo communicator or whatever they call it. Holocom would be an interesting name for it. I don't know if they ever named it. And they're like, oh yeah, you know, I get sick of it. I have to use my view screen to talk to everybody else. Nobody really wanted it installed on their ships, and everybody who, you know, something like that, you know. You could phase it out easily as just being a fad nobody really wanted. It's kind of like the whole question of whether or not, this is an entertainment thing, so it's entirely different, but it's kind of like whether or not VR will catch on. I've done virtual reality, and, you know, it was pretty cool. I could see it as catching on. And some people keep saying, it's the future, we're going to have virtual reality video games and stuff like that. And then it keeps never happening. Is it cool? Yeah, it is. Do I think it's going to take over? Completely? Utterly? Not really. No, I don't. And like I said, it's a novelty. These holograms that they're using for communication are basically a novelty. But it's supposed to be a Starfleet vessel serving the needs of the United Federation of Planets, not some sort of wacky carnival ship of mystery and magic, you know. So, yeah, aesthetically, I think the reason why the hologram should go away is completely aesthetic reason. The idea that they're going to come up with like this, it looks as though the reason why they're going to get rid of the damn thing is by having this evil force called control, by having it be able to create all these holograms, and maybe it can use the holographic system to do something. But it appears as though the threat that's going to make them get rid of the holographic systems is going to be this control thing. And I think that's unnecessary, and I actually think it's kind of silly, because if this thing could hack into any starship's control system, control system, if this thing called control can hack into any ship's holographic system, then shouldn't it be able to hack into any starship's computer and do damage other ways? I mean, but I get the feeling that this is going to be why the holograms are going to go away. Holograms are going to be treated as too big of a threat. But I don't know. To me, that just further convolutes things, because if you had like this entity that exists as like a computer virus or whatever that could just hack any starship and use the holographic systems this way, it should still be able to hack and use other starship systems. You know, like whatever fixes this thing's ability to just access other starships, data, computer info, whatever would allow it to access the ship's holographic systems, its ability to hack into another starship or just communicate to another starship, whatever. I mean, it should be able to do other things similar. It should be able to create a false image on a view screen if it's just the image of people that's the threat, which obviously it's not going to be just that. And these are not advanced holograms like the Doctor and Voyager or anything on the Next Generation holodeck. Not nearly like Vic Fontaine, if I pronounce his name correctly. It's been a while since I watched the episodes of Deep Space Nine with that character. Vic Fontaine, I think was it. Not even like that, you know. Like, it's not like they're going to be able to push buttons or, you know. So, it's like, why? But that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like. It's going to be this control thing is going to be a threat. But as far as I'm concerned, is if this thing could still hack your regular visual communications, still create false images that way, and or control things at all on the ship at a distance, regardless of holograms or not, it still is a threat. So getting rid of the holograms wouldn't solve that. That said, I think that's what they're going for, because Star Trek Discovery doesn't care if it makes sense or not. But if they outlaw holograms because of a weird computer virus style threat that can use holograms, you'd think that would make them scared to develop the holodeck in the future. You'd think that they would be cautious before they ever created an emergency medical hologram, because reasons. You'd think whatever they could do to solve the problem of this thing hacking into all holograms everywhere, you'd think that if they had to do something to prevent it from hacking into all holograms everywhere, you also need to stop it from hacking into all computer systems everywhere. But anyway, I think I worded my thought and rambled over the point repeatedly, and I think I worded it accurately, but it's just such a convoluted thing. But basically what I'm saying is, I think that this control threat, this thing that is the big bad enemy, that they don't want to get the data from the sphere that they encountered, I'm getting the hint that this is the reason why holograms are going to go away and everything's just going to look like the original series. I just don't. I don't think that's a good fix. Basically, I don't think it's a good fix. Yeah, it feels like it's making things even more convoluted. Isn't that what Star Trek Discovery is all about, though? That said, another possible fix is this Red Angel thing, which is dealing with a timeline where Earth, Teller, Andor, Vulcan, and pretty much every world with organic sentient life gets wiped out. That apparently is the future that Discovery is hitting towards now. Maybe when they solve that problem, when they finally fix the problem, maybe they'll undo Discovery's existence. Yeah. In which case, I'm sure a lot of people like that, and in a way, I would too, to get Discovery out of the way. And but it's still, Discovery's having existed as an alternate timeline. If they do it that way, that Discovery gets undone somehow, and that leads up to a whole new timeline that leads into the original series properly. I think that still raises more questions. It still leaves a lot of questions. Basically, there's a lot of bad writing on Star Trek Discovery that a simple retcon, actually that wouldn't be a retcon, a simple change in the timeline wouldn't fix. But my thoughts are, I think I know where this is going. Somehow the magical holograms that they have are working with the magical computer entity known as Control. Yeah, Control's going to use them, and that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like. That's what I think they're going to do to make things look more like the Star Trek as we know it. Now, I've commented on this before, and I really rambled over that last point way too long for such a straight... No. Discovery's so convoluted, it's hard to describe a straightforward, worded, clearly thought based on Star Trek Discovery because it's so convoluted. And then I tend to ramble awkwardly anyway. Discovery, well, I don't think it works very well as a prequel to Star Trek the original series. And there's a lot more problems than aesthetics. Some people think a way to solve it is to treat it as, and I've commented on this before, I commented on again, some people think that to treat Star Trek Discovery as a follow-up to Enterprise and say that that was a separate timeline created by First Contact is a way to solve it. It's a way to solve the problem. And to which I would say, well, Star Trek Discovery does not work very well as a sequel to Enterprise. Now, granted, it's closer in time to the original series, thus it is an even greater contradiction of the original series because there's so little time in between. But I don't think it works well as a sequel to Enterprise. Straight up, it just doesn't feel like the world that Enterprise has left behind. Even if you decided to follow up Enterprise with a series that wasn't the original series and have the timeline go off in a separate direction, I don't think Discovery works as a sequel to Enterprise. That said, as for Star Trek timelines, if Discovery is to fit in the same timeline as Enterprise, and thus the aftermath of First Contact, everything, what's portrayed in First Contact as soon as the characters go back in time, which Enterprise definitely is in a timeline created by the events of Star Trek First Contact. The thing is, so is Voyager. The Borg and Voyager remember the events of First Contact. Excuse me. Well, it seems to be the reason why in Voyager that they know about the events of First Contact and how everything played out. Most likely because of the transmission that was sent in the episode of Enterprise that fixed that problem, because the Borg tried to send a signal to the Delta Quadrant in Star Trek First Contact. And you know what? The device, maybe they did send it. The device got powered up, but it seemed to get destroyed nearly immediately, and it didn't seem like they had it just seemed like that they saved the day. Well, they saved the day by destroying the device as soon as it got powered up. If it sent a signal at that time, before they destroyed it, if it actually had sent the signal, and the Borg had received the signal, well, that signal would have caused the Borg to send an invasion fleet, and they would have lost. So the signal didn't get there. They did successfully stop the signal in First Contact. So when the Borg sent the signal that made the Borg Collective aware of the events of First Contact, would have had to have been later, such as the Borg that were freezing to death when they crash landed in the Arctic. Well, didn't literally freeze to death because their implants kept them alive, but froze them to a point of stasis. Mispronouncing my words. Put them in, froze them to the point of inactivity in the Arctic, the Borg debris that crashed, and there were a few drones in it. Their implants apparently were recording the information from the other drones. The other drones, everybody, all the members of the collective were communicating with each other, at least in the local area, and they sent the message in that Enterprise episode, but they were using technology from starships that was very crude, and when they realized that that species sent a message off to some place in the Delta Quadrant, it would take it about 200 years for the message to get there. Now, in First Contact, it was indicated that the message would have probably been pretty close to instant, and First Contact was 100 years prior to this. So you would have been if it did take 200 years for the setup they had in First Contact, you would have been dealing with a major Borg invasion around the time period of Kirk. If it did take 200 years, but it probably wouldn't have in First Contact because more advanced deflector dish they were working with, and it did seem like it would have been a more imminent threat. In Enterprise, the message that was sent was established that that particular message was going to take 200 years to get to its destination. roughly 200 years, which would explain why in Star Trek The Next Generation you had the Borg buzzing around in local space, scooping up Federation and Romulan colonies. In the first season of Next Generation, before the Borg were actually revealed to be the one that scooped up these colonies and moved on. And also, probably also the reason why you had episodes like I, Borg and Descent, because you had more Borg in the area as a result. It did seem as though the Borg invasion of Earth was motivated by Q. When Borg actually, in Best of Both Worlds, that did seem like it was directly motivated. That was the impression I came away with. From Q blipping the Galaxy-class Enterprise to Borg space and then back home again, because I guess that was pretty attention-getting to the Borg. I mean, the Borg were like, wow, we ain't seen them do that before. We better start assimilating them. That's what it looked like to me. I mean, why else would the Borg care that much about Earth in particular? Other than because it's the center of the Federation, or at least the main planet of the Federation, and it's like, well, the Federation are now blipping all over the galaxy. We better get our hands on that shit. But it's actually Q technology or Q's ability that did it. So even the encounters before Q, you can blame on Q. But Q was warning them that sooner or later they were going to encounter the Borg. And it was the failure of the Borg to assimilate Earth in Best of Both Worlds that appears to have led to the second attack on Earth by the Borg in Star Trek First Contact. So you have it starting with Q, then Best of Both Worlds, then First Contact. Then it comes around, and then you have Regeneration and Enterprise, leading to the disappearing colonies in Next Generation Season 1. Of course, Q-Who is still going to happen with the encounter with the Borg. Thus, Best of Both Worlds is still going to happen, but you're also going to have episodes like I, Borg and Descent Part 1 and Part 2. And, of course, the Borg, after failing to take Earth the first time, are still going to do First Contact again, and then like Voyager ended off there in the Delta Quadrant and all that. So you do end up with an alternate line. You do end up with two different timelines in that scenario, but only one. But the one that you see with Enterprise is the one that leads up to Next Generation Season 1. Yeah, anyway, that's just what I... But anyway, whether or not you agree with that assessment, the thing is, if you put... Voyager did know about the events of First Contact and how they played out, or at least the Borg and Voyager did. 7 of 9 made that clear in at least 2 different episodes, which means that information got back to the Borg somehow. So if you separate Discovery and Enterprise from the main Star Trek timeline, then you also have to separate Voyager as well. And really, I think you would end up separating the Next Generation also. Now, the worst, when you look at like Deep Space Nine and the original series, I can see some contradictions between those and other Star Trek shows, which is no insult to either the original series or Deep Space Nine. I'm just like comparing the various Star Trek shows as a whole. I suppose you could create an alternate timeline. Maybe the original series and Deep Space Nine are the shows that take place in the timeline that was before First Contact changed the timeline, if you wanted. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure if I like that idea or not, but I'd be interested in whether or not you could come up with a timeline where the original timeline is Star Trek the Animated Series. That there's 2 different timelines, and some of the little fluctuations that make the difference actually cause one of the timelines to split off and become Star Trek the Animated Series. And let's see, it looked like there was a new T.J. Kirk video. I thought he changed his branding to the Amazing... Oh, it's TJ Does Life, that's it, which is the Amazing Atheist's other channel. He's doing a video titled Duck You. Yeah. Which is what autocorrect sometimes likes to turn one of the most popular expressions that come to mind when dealing with humans. Anyways, I've been rambling on for quite a while here. And yeah, we're over an hour if I'm reading that right. Alright, so anyway, I've been talking about Star Trek and Star Trek Discovery for a while. Praise the Orville. The Orville is wonderful. And if there's any online streaming sites that you can watch it when it's not on television, watch it there, and then watch it on Fox too. Because just watch the Orville. It's good for the ratings, and you know, I actually I'm not sure. Not sure if it was a reference. It might have been a reference to some of the Marvel movies, or maybe it was a reference to Star Wars. But it was one or the other. Excuse me. I think it was Daredevil. Okay, I didn't watch the Daredevil Netflix show. There was a show for Daredevil on Netflix. Yeah, it was Daredevil. Yeah, yeah, and it makes more sense now that I remember that it was Daredevil. But anyway, I'm pretty sure it was somebody in a Daredevil costume holding up a sign written in Braille. It says "Fuck Disney." Because I'm not sure. I think I could be completely wrong about this because I didn't look into it. It was just a meme I saw earlier today. I'm pretty sure Disney had. I think Disney had it was like a Daredevil series that I didn't watch, but I think it was pretty good from references on the internet, which I can or cannot confirm. But anyway, I think it did get canceled because Disney wanted to move it to their own streaming service. And Disney's going to have their own streaming service. Plus, they also are partial owners of Hulu. I don't know if they're going to close down Hulu or keep it going or what they'll do, but because now that they own Fox, which I don't know. I'm always a little bit concerned when these. Oh, another notification. New from Lore Reloaded. Analyzing who the Board Queen is. That could be actually interesting. After you watch this video, maybe you'll want to go check that one out. Yeah, nobody's watching. Yeah, alright, anyway, so here's me just rambling on about Star Trek and Star Trek Discovery. Yeah, I'm not sure how they're going to shoehorn Star Trek Discovery into the timeline, but the Red Angel involves time travel, and the show appears to be in flux. Actually, what is the most canonical version of Star Trek, the original series? If you just stop and look at any TV show, the thing about TV shows and books, when you read a book, it's kind of like the pages are telling you a story. When you watch a cartoon, it's like the TV screen is drawing you a story, but you're not supposed to see literally exactly what's on the screen. It's just supposed to be a close representation of what the story is telling you. With live action television, you tend to assume that what you're seeing on the screen is hard, solid fact for the fictional universe you're watching. So with a live action TV show, you tend to think of what you're seeing as what's there. Then some shows will do a visual reboot or visually retcon what something looks like, which sometimes happens, and you either accept it or you don't. Whatever. But it is just a storytelling medium. With Star Trek, the original series, there's actually two versions of it. There's the original, which originally aired on television in the 60s, and despite the fact there were various forms of it being remastered, until one specific point, it almost always remained the same. Then you had the remastered version, like the really remastered version, where they really redid all the shots of the ships and all sorts of on-screen imagery. They kept the original audio, although personally I would be fine with if some of the sound effects were altered a little bit, but nope, they didn't do that. They kept all the original audio exactly as is. And they really redid stuff. And some of it I thought, why? But the thing is, technically that was one of the biggest canonical changes in Star Trek, because it actually took what you were seeing and completely changed it. And I actually don't hate the idea of the remastered version. I'm glad that Star Trek fans handled that better than the Star Wars fans that freaked out every time something was changed. Like, whenever there was, like, somebody added, like, when George Lucas went back, and he's like, well, I wish we had an Imperial Walker in the background there. And then somebody was like, what? This new version on DVD doesn't look anything like my old VHS cassette, because there's a little thing walking along in the background, you know? And the way that they freaked out about it, I wasn't a fan of. I wasn't a fan of the fan reaction to some of the changes made to the Star Wars movies. But then again, I wasn't that big of a Star Wars fan. And I'm glad that Star Trek fans generally took the remastering of Star Trek the Original Series a little bit better than that. But that said, I kind of understood it. The fan reaction to Star Wars changing what they had. And when I bought Star Wars, when I actually collected the Star Wars original trilogy on DVD, I bought the DVD set, or well, that wasn't a DVD set. I bought the DVDs, the individual DVDs of episodes 4, 5, and 6 that came with an extra disc, and the extra disc was or had the movie in its original form, what it looked like the first time it came out in theaters. See, they kept changing it. And in my opinion, I'm okay with the original creator going back and changing things to be more the way he wished it could have been if he had the technology at the time, or if he had more time to make certain decisions. I'm fine with the original creator going back and doing that. But whenever that's done, I do always believe that you should make it available, that you can still acquire the original version that people saw in theaters, the original version that pre-existed before this revised version. If you're going to release a special director's cut, I believe you should still be able to somehow purchase the theatrical cut. And with something as popular as Star Wars, you know, I mean, it's an excuse for whoever's printing these DVD discs to just print another DVD, or now Blu-ray, or 4K Blu-ray, or whatever version of Blu-ray you would prefer, to print another disc and the fans to buy it. So straight up, I'm like, you know, I think whenever you redo something, the original version should be kept and made available. But I'm okay with making a more remastered version of something. But with Star Trek the Original Series, like I said, I'm okay with them remastering it. But I'm also thinking whenever it gets released on DVD, I think it would be good, or Blu-ray, I think it would be good to make sets of it available with the alternate versions, which of course would take up a lot more space on disc. But actually, if they released the original version, like if they released a version of it on Blu-ray that had both the new version and the original version, and if the original version was just in SD, standard definition, old school standard definition, that wouldn't take up as much space on the disc, you wouldn't think. I've seen, I think it was the series Sonic X was recently released on standard definition Blu-ray, and they fit the entire series on just 2 discs because it was standard definition. And I'm actually absolutely fine with that idea. There we go. But with the remastering of Star Trek, I actually thought some of the times the older effects looked a bit better. I remember there was one time I was like watching them fly through a nebula, and I was thinking, this looks like video game graphics, but not good video game graphics. Good video game graphics for a previous generation of video game systems, but I remember thinking that a couple times, that I didn't think that the newer version looked better. And with Star Trek having a tradition of trying to keep things looking like Star Trek, with the exception of the Klingon foreheads, and then when they retconned the Klingon forehead, they did a litany of things to explain it until Enterprise finally explained it. But Deep Space Nine spent some time joking around about it in the Trouble with Tribbles episode, Trials and Tribulations. Yeah, that episode of Deep Space Nine, which revisited the Trouble with Tribbles from the original series, they joked about it there, and some stuff like that. You know, like the Klingon forehead thing became like it was originally going to be a visual reboot, but it became like Star Trek's biggest unexplained sore thumb that was just stuck out until Enterprise fixed that problem. And you know what? It seems as though Discovery has not acknowledged what Enterprise did with the Klingons either, which I thought was kind of weird. That Discovery went through all that effort to turn a Klingon into a human, and it's like, yeah, it's already been halfway done, more than halfway done, and you got to do what now? Yeah, I really think Discovery, if you need to put Discovery in a separate timeline, it should not be in the same timeline as Enterprise. But anyway, what I'm basically trying to say is, and really I'm rambling bad with this one, I'm spending way too much time on a single thought and not getting to the point, but with the original series, when they remastered it, I actually am kind of disappointed in a way. Like, sometimes I find it looks better, sometimes I find the older way looked better, and when they were trying to make it look better, like, there's a little moments where I think, why? Like, there were certain times when they changed the phaser color. Like, I remember reading a reference to phasers being blue in a Star Trek novel. And I think it was one of the William Shatner books. And he referenced the blue flashes of phaser fire could be seen way up in the sky. Like, that the starships were close enough down in the atmosphere that you could see, like, phaser fire flashing from them. I think it was one of the William Shatner novels. And I thought to myself, well, this was actually taking place, although it had connections to the original series, it was actually taking place in the Next Generation. And in the Next Generation, the phasers almost always looked kind of an orangish color. It was like a hot orange. It looked like, you know, well, you've either seen Next Generation phasers or you haven't. But you know what the phasers usually look like in Next Generation. And I thought, well, you know, this could be a callback to the original series, but then I thought to myself, in the original series, most of the time, I was pretty sure the phasers looked red. And then I was like, well, no, there were a bunch of times the phasers were blue. And then but I thought, but weren't they red most of the time? And I was like thinking, in the original series, most of the time, weren't the phasers red? And I think some of the scenes that I remember the most were scenes where the Enterprise fired its phasers and they were red. But there were sometimes they were blue, because I remember reading that and thinking, well, in Star Trek The Next Generation, Birth of the Federation, video game for the personal computer, the Federation phasers are represented by blue. Well, I think the Romulans get green disruptors, the Ferengi have like yellow forced plasma phasers, which I think they just call them forced plasma beams. The Cardassians get purple phasers in that game. I think the Klingons get red disruptors in that game. And I'm pretty sure I've seen Klingon disruptors firing in episodes looking either green or red. I think I'm thinking Deep Space Nine and Next Generation at the moment. But I remember thinking, you know, that Federation phasers in the original series, I remember thinking, more often than not, I thought they looked red. The handheld phasers, more often than not, I was thinking blue, but more often than not, red. I was thinking for the shipboard phasers. And then when I rewatched it, it's like, yeah, you see red a lot and you see blue a lot. Well, I noticed with the visual reboot, I'm sure there were times when I used to see red phasers, and they've basically retconned it as like blue all the time, or not all the time, but more often. And I thought, what? Why? That just seemed unnecessary to me. I mean, the phaser beams, I have no problem with different firing conditions causing the phasers to be different colors at different times. And I noticed that with even though this book I think was written before the HD remastering of Star Trek, where they redid all the special effects, I'm pretty sure it was before all that. There were little details that I just thought, why didn't they try to leave it the same? It just thought were unnecessary changes. Well, that was one of them. It's like, in the past, I'm pretty sure I've seen phasers being fired all kinds of colors in the original series, mostly red or blue, and it was red that I remembered the most clearly, but I do remember blue. And now it seems like when they redid it, it's always blue, or more often than it used to be blue. And I'm pretty sure they changed the colors of the phasers in the episode when they redid the scene where they go up against the Doomsday Machine. It just seemed unnecessary to me. That said, it's not a major complaint. I mean, but, the thought I was originally getting to is it kind of makes me wonder if you could treat each version of Star Trek as being two different timelines where nearly the exact same thing is happening, just a little different, I wonder if you could excuse the two different versions. The old standard version of the episodes with the new HD remasters as being two different timelines. Or perhaps looking at a point in history that was in flux. And I really spent way too much time on that point. But anyway, to get to where I was thinking is Star Trek Discovery, where everything looks wrong. I mean, there's some stuff that's just too consistently wrong, like the Crossfield class ship. It's like absurdly designed, the Crossfield class starship. And I could go into all kinds of details, such as rotating hull sections that they haven't even given us a hint as to how you could rationalize that in relation to the spore drive, despite the fact they connected it to the spore drive. And why? Just why? They shouldn't have. No, that was bad. Bad Star Trek Discovery. Bad Star Trek Discovery. Don't do that. But you have the rotating sections. You have the shuttle bay that's they never close the door on it. Like oddities like that. They're consistently the way they are. So I would assume that that's not in flux. But one thing that does seem to be in flux is what the hell a Constitution-class starship is. Just to use that as an example of something in Star Trek Discovery that kind of makes it look like what you're viewing when you view Star Trek Discovery is a storyteller that's not always giving you the same details. That the storyteller just might not be telling you everything the way it actually is. That if you were to view the television show as a story being told to you, which it technically is, but the details on screen as just being the storyteller not getting the details right or going into enough details to form a proper mental image. If you look at it that way, you can reconcile some of the little things that Star Trek Discovery has done. But in other ways, perhaps with all these time-altering events with the spore drive and the Red Angel, perhaps you could say the universe around them is constantly in flux, and we don't know which version of the timeline we're looking at. And I use the Constitution-class starship as an example, after spending way too much time rambling about weird little things that I thought were unnecessary to change in the remastering of the original series. But the first time they show a Constitution-class starship, I'm pretty sure, is when a diagram of it appears on a view screen of the Defiant. And when I say the Defiant, I don't mean the Defiant class starship named Defiant. I mean the Constitution-class starship, Defiant, which was shown in an episode of Star Trek the Original Series to look like a pre-refit, not the big refit that changed a lot of features, but what the original Constitution-class starship looked like. It looked like a Constitution-class starship, as we recognize it. Straight warp pylons holding the warp nacelles in place, all the stuff just looking the right shape, everything. That's how it looked like in Star Trek the Original Series, before it phased into interphasic space and ended up lost in space and time, later emerging in the mirror universe, a century in the past, roughly a century in the past, and the mirror universe Enterprise episode showed us the ship once again, and when they showed us that ship, exactly the same ship. It matched consistently. It was a proper Constitution-class starship that looked like a Constitution-class starship should look. Then Discovery shows us a diagram of it. And it's got weird, bendy warp nacelle pylons and just stuff on it that just looks wrong. It looks like some other civilization tried to make a Constitution-class knockoff. It looks like a Constitution-class starship from another universe. It does not look like a Constitution-class starship, but when you see that Defiant, the Constitution-class Defiant, in Discovery, it was just a diagram on a view screen, but it just looks completely and utterly wrong. Then we see, at the end of Season 1, the Constitution-class Enterprise, and it also looks different. I will say this. It looks cool. It's actually a nice redesign of the Constitution-class overall look. If it was an alternate refit, I'd be fine with that. But it's not consistent with something that happened about 2 years prior to this. It doesn't look like what the Enterprise would have looked like in the Cage, the original pilot episode, and it doesn't look like what it will look like 10 years later in Star Trek the Original Series Season 1. And as for what it looked like in the Cage, that is, if you want to ignore the canonical value of the Cage, because it was an on-aired pilot that eventually got released on VHS and then DVD, but it was originally an on-aired pilot. Most of the Cage, and even the appearance of the Enterprise, as I recall, were backed up and reinforced in the flashback scenes of the Menagerie. And, the two-part episode was the Menagerie. Yeah, the Menagerie. I'm just worried I might have got the name wrong there for a minute. But yeah, the two-part episode of the original series that had flashbacks to the Cage, because much of that episode ended up as in flashbacks in a later episode of the original series, reinforced what the ship was supposed to look like. So at one point in between, here in Discovery, it just looks different, as if it underwent. It would take a massive refit to look like that, and it just seems wrong. Yeah, it just seems wrong. It's wrong. Just wrong. Yeah. Now, perhaps that was a refit that was done to the ship after the Cage, and maybe the refit will get undone. Now, there's some size issues, but I'm going to ignore the size issues because size often looks inconsistent on screen in Star Trek anyway. I'm going to ignore that. I'm just going to focus on the shape of the ship. But, okay, so I established that the ship looks wrong. It has, the warp nacelles kind of look like they looked in the original series, but the pylons that hold them in place are kind of shaped kind of like they looked in the movie era, and overall I like that combination because I preferred the earlier style warp nacelles, but I actually like the pylons that held them in place better in the movies. So I kind of like this design. I'll give them credit for making a design that looked cool, but it looked wrong for the time period. And while it was portrayed as looking like that in the end of season 1 and the beginning of season 2. When you see it again at the beginning of season 2, there's an on-screen diagram showing what the ship looks like. And it looks exactly like it did in the original series and Deep Space Nine and Enterprise and any other episode that had shown what a Constitution-class starship looks like. Its design was consistent with original series, Deep Space Nine and Enterprise portrayals of the Constitution-class starship. On the view screen, or not the main view screen, but on a screen in the background of a scene. So in that scene, it looked like it should look in Star Trek the original series, and also had looked like in Deep Space Nine and Enterprise. But when they show you a scene of it from space, it has the inconsistent look that has the wrong warp nacelle pylons, that they're sloped back from a different position on the hull, and they're sloped back a bit more, and like the other, it basically from scene to scene, it looks different. Or I should say, from viewpoint to viewpoint, it looks different. And if you were to look at both the Enterprise and the Constitution-class Enterprise and the Constitution-class Defiant, look at them as the same design, which they're supposed to be, especially at that time. This is pre-refit. This is before the refit of Star Trek the Motion Picture. They should be, for all intents and purposes, the same ship. They're not literally the same ship, but the same appearance, It's like two Honda Civics made from the same year, and they're both a coupe, should look about the same. Maybe different paint jobs, whatever, but same shape. Two Chevrolet Cavaliers from the same year, if they're both a coupe, or if they're both a sedan, or if it's a really early years, wagon, hatchback, and convertible, as long as, the year and model are the same, and trim level, should look the same, And the Constitution-class Defiant and the Constitution-class Enterprise, are established to look the same. So, treating the Constitution-class in those incidents as the same ship, or same ship design, that exact same design has been portrayed looking at least 3 different ways from 3 different perspectives. A diagram screen in the mirror universe, which is a parallel universe, so you can take what you will from that, portrayed it one way. Looking at it from space in scenes from the last episode of season 1 and the first episode of season 2, looking a very specific different way, which was also inconsistent. And then on a monitor in the background where it looked just like it's supposed to look. So it seems as though Star Trek Discovery is telling us it's an inconsistent storyteller, and those little details don't matter. So maybe we can treat Star Trek Discovery as though it's in flux. There's a lot of time travel going on with Star Trek Discovery. The universe is getting wobbled in weird ways. They've accidentally blipped into parallel universes. Who knows what's constantly being changed. And yeah, Star Trek Discovery is inconsistent. Just treat it as if it's in flux. And I spent a lot of time saying that, and it's such a simple thought. I guess the caffeine isn't really helping that much. Oh well. I should probably end this soon. Where's my beverage? Alright. Yeah. Well, this has caffeine in it. I don't normally drink the stuff with sugar in it, but I had to get some of this as a novelty. Yeah. Crystal Pepsi. Crystal Pepsi. Does it look like it's a bottle full of water? Actually, I think water would be more clear. It does have kind of like a cloudy look to it, but that could just be the plastic. Yep. Crystal Pepsi. It's basically Pepsi, but instead of caffeine, it has crystal meth. So that might actually help me stay awake now that I'm, well, I think I always was partially immune to caffeine. And, you know, now that, actually, no, it is caffeinated. It's caffeine. It's not crystal meth. Though, so, who knows? Who knows what crazy products you'll see from Pepsi in the future. And I in no way, shape, or form would recommend anybody try crystal meth. Don't have any personal experiences, but from what I hear, you'll get a lot of energy, a lot of focus, and a whole lot of crazy that just won't make it worth it. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, Crystal Pepsi. I don't normally buy the beverages with sugar in them, but back in the early 90s, I remember this. In fact, I can think back to, I'm pretty sure it was Crystal Pepsi. I was drinking in cans of it at the time. Back when I was originally getting into Star Trek, I'd started watching The Next Generation on television, and I started getting the original series movies on VHS. I think I remember sitting back in the living room in the apartment I used to live in Sheet Harbor at the time, watching Star Trek on VHS and drinking Crystal Pepsi. I actually saved some of the cans somewhere, and I rinsed them out and saved them just because I thought it was kind of cool. And I think I don't know if they're up in one of the closets or not, but empty cans that I rinsed out. I hope I still have them because why not? Yeah, Crystal Pepsi. I just remember drinking it and liking it. I remember the ads at the time period, too. They played Van Halen's Right Now as the music on the ads. You'd have, like, the music Right Now and Crystal Pepsi as their exciting way to promote Crystal Pepsi. My only problem with it is it's not Diet Crystal Pepsi or Crystal Pepsi Zero, because I normally get the stuff that doesn't have sugar in it. But I figured I'd pick myself up a bottle of Crystal Pepsi. I remember back when Saturday Night Live was actually amusing. All right, when was it Saturday Night Live used to be amusing? How long ago was that? That was, all right, let's see. Going back in time 1 decade. No, they sucked back then. Going back in time 2 decades. Yeah, they pretty much sucked then. We're talking almost 3 decades ago, actually. Yeah, a little less than 3 decades ago. You know, something like 25, 26, 27, maybe 28 years ago they used to be cool. Saturday Night Live. You know, back when Saturday Night Live was pretty cool. I remember watching them in the early 90s, and I remember they had, I loved their fake advertisements they used to do. And they probably still do, but it's Saturday Night Live, so I don't think I could force myself to watch an episode of it anymore, but they used to do, like, they have, like, fake ads on the old episodes of Saturday Night Live, and probably still do. And I remember they did, like, it was a parody of the Crystal Pepsi ad, except they called it Crystal Gravy, and they had people drinking, like, this transparent, oily liquid. They were calling it Crystal Gravy. And anyway, and then Crystal Pepsi came back a few years ago, and I remember seeing it in stores and buying a bottle or two, and I remember, yeah, I still like it, but I don't normally get the stuff with sugar. There we go. Opened her up. Let's see what it's like. It tastes like sugar water, actually. Like, it's supposed to be a clear cola, and it actually says somewhere on a cola. And, well, cola, there's actually ingredients that go into cola. It used to be cocaine, actually, at the, you know, like over a century ago, or maybe it was exactly a century ago. But there was a time both Pepsi and Coke had cocaine as an ingredient. And, in fact, they still have ingredients from the cocaine plant, just not the drug cocaine. But there's also a substance or an object called cola nuts, spelled with a K, and I believe some sort of extract from those does go into cola. And I can detect the carbonation. I can feel the carbonated bubbles on my tongue when I drink it. and that carbonated water taste. Plus, it is kind of sweet. It tastes like sugar water, actually. I don't really notice much of a cola taste. But I think that is fairly consistent with, because I hardly ever drink cola with sugar in it. I always get the Diet Cola. And I think the fact that I got used to Diet Cola, and by getting used to Diet Cola, I mean no longer like cola that has sugar in it. I think that's why it doesn't taste like very much to me now. It's not bad, but it's not great. If I still drank Pepsi with sugar in it, I'd probably think it was pretty good. But it's like it's got a different taste. Like the Diet Colas, they're sweeter, but it's not like a slimy, sticky sweetness. It's like a good sweetness. Recently I've been picking up this stuff. Now this is something I really like. The Feisty Cherry Diet Coke. Now this stuff's actually really good. I'm not going to bother opening it just because you know, I had it was setting in the port. It's actually kind of cold. I could have just stuck it in the fridge here. I'll stick it in the fridge right next to Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce. That's good stuff. I don't have much of it left. Right, there it is at the bottom. Not even. Oh, good stuff. Sweet and spicy. It's actually good barbecue sauce. Oh, what's this one? What's this one? Oh, that's Cherry Coca-Cola Zero. Yeah, Cherry Coca-Cola Zero. That's a good one, too. There we go. Putting that back in the fridge. Yeah, nah. Anyway, yeah. The Diet Pepsi Feisty Cherry. Yeah, but this time last year, I think it was, they started advertising Diet Pepsi in different flavors. And I was like, I should get some of that. You know? I drink a lot of cola. I love me some Diet Cola. And I'll get lots of the Diet Pepsi in these various flavors. And they already had like or not Pepsi, Diet Coke. Diet Coke, I mean, in those flavors. And I figured I could pick up a bunch of cans of them and take it. There we go. Landed on the edge of the screen here, leaning on the side of the video. There we go. I figured I'd get a whole bunch of cans of the stuff and take it with me to work because I always want some cans of pop in my lunch bag at work. Carry a bag of crap with myself at work to have with me in case well, it usually ends up full of garbage that I need to clear out of it. But, you know, usually some food items in there. And then some old empty chip bags. There's always empty chip bags in there. You eat the chips, stuff the bag back in the lunch bag, and then forget to take it out later, you know. Well, it does get taken out later, but not as fast as I probably should. Yeah, and I was like, get a bunch of them. And every time I saw them in stores, I wanted to buy boxes of them, get them by the box, get a box full of them. You know, usually better, more efficient deal to just buy a box of the stuff than buy individual ones. Because I did see some places had the individual cans, but I thought to myself, oh, I'll stockpile them. Every time I saw them, I was out of money. Then it'd be like payday or something like that. I'd have money to stock up on stuff. Not a sign of them. Maybe every now and then they just have like a box of the Feisty Cherry left, or a box of the lime ginger flavor, and so I'd be like, all right, well, I'll get some now. And eventually, like throughout the summer, throughout that spring and summer of last year, I'd see it all the time when I had, you know, some extra money to spend and I was picking up food items. Then I'd be low on money, just have enough money to get through until, you know, it was getting close to payday. Not a trace of it. I remember saying, all right, I'll come back to this store when I have some money because I just got enough money to pick up a few things today. I'm not going to spend it all loading up on Diet Cola when I already have Diet Cola to take in my lunch for work. You know, I'm not going to buy a bunch of cans today. Then I'd come back after payday to the same store that I saw it in. It'd be all gone. And actually, throughout the summer, at the end of the summer, I thought, well, It's another one of those fads. They come out with these new flavors, and then they're going away. It's always great when they bring out new flavors, but they always get rid of something else that added to the variety of interesting flavors for you to drink, you know. And this looked good. I like cola, Diet Cola, flavored variations of cola to keep the cola flavors interesting. Excuse me. And it kept going away. Then I was at some friend's wedding, and I was going to visit them after the wedding. I was talking to them, and I was going to stop in with them. Well, two of them got married, and the third person stays there as well. And I was going to hang out with them afterwards. And when they were heading home from their wedding reception, I remember I went off to the store. It was the same day that my cell phone ran out of data, because apparently a few text messages will eat up many dollars worth of cell phone data. I literally mean just a few text messages. Changed the cell phone plan to something that wasn't as good as the old cell phone plan. And I'm just going to take a shot of nasal spray so my sinuses don't swell shut on me. And comment on a story I believe I told before, but I don't know if I uploaded the video or not. But isn't really interesting anyway. But I remember going to the store that night, and I wasn't broke. I wasn't broke for once. And there it was, a whole bunch of, they actually had the boxes of cans of the flavored Diet Coke when I went to the store. This was, well, close to where the wedding reception was. Yeah, I went to the store, and it was in Porter's Lake. Sometimes I was seeing it in the store in Jador, but Porter's Lake was the store I went to at that time. And there I was in Porter's Lake, the Porter's Lake Superstore, and finally managed to get a good load of this stuff. This would have been in September, which is near the end of the season of active work. So you know, I stocked up on this stuff, getting close to a time period where there was going to be significantly less work and income due to things related to tourism and so forth, which I'm not going to get into those details at this time, or probably at all. But nonetheless, you know, the work season was winding down, was going to be a lot less busy with work in the near future. But nonetheless, I finally had a chance to stock up on the stuff and got it at the end of September. Then later in the year, I thought it had gone away forever, but I think I had seen it again in December and picked some up in December. So I actually have some set aside that I picked up in December. I got 3 out of the 4 flavors that time. I don't think I could find a box of each, but... And now, as I just pointed out, I got a bottle of it. So now it's not just available in cans. Now I've been seeing the bottles of the Feisty Cherry. So that might have been the most popular flavor, and it was a good one. I think I actually, although I liked it, and I also liked Coke Zero Cherry, I actually think I preferred the Cherry Coke Zero over the Diet Coke Feisty Cherry. Which are slightly different flavors, but, yeah. I like them both. Now it's vanilla. They brought back vanilla Coke in the form of Coke Zero Vanilla. Now, that's pretty good too. It's so sweet. It's really sickly though. There's no sugar. It's Coke Zero. So now they label it Coke Zero Sugar because they got to point out that the zero means it doesn't have sugar. It's like, yeah, we know it's a Diet Cola. It's sugar free, so it doesn't have the sticky sweetness of sugar. But it's actually sweeter than sugar, you know. Which is what I want, and you know, this here has the sticky sweetness of sugar. This Crystal Pepsi. So basically, it's just some sugar poisoning my pancreas when I drink it. And bubbly carbonated water. So it's that's basically all I really taste. There's like a slightly different taste to it. That could be the Crystal Cola, because apparently it's still a cola. Yeah, the very last ingredient is natural flavors. The second last ingredient is gum Arabic, if I'm reading that correctly. It's not Arabic gum, but it's gum Arabic. That's the English, isn't it? Yeah. The third last ingredient is caffeine. So that means there's more caffeine in it than natural flavors. And if you're thinking the natural flavors might be sugar, it's like, nope. After carbonated water, the second ingredient, and thus the second most prominent ingredient, is glucose, fructose, and or sugar. Yippee! Yippee sugar. Yeah. But yeah, I've also been stockpiling, and I'm really getting off topic now, but yeah, that was my quest for flavored Diet Coke, and now I can get the Coke Feisty Cherry in the form of bottles, which is great because you can drink half of it, reseal the bottle, stick it in the fridge, you know, whatever. You don't have to worry about it going tinny, like if it's sitting in a tin can too long. Or the fact that, you know, tin cans aren't really made to be resealed. I mean, if I didn't drink all this in one setting and left it setting around for a couple hours, especially if it's in a relatively warm environment, it's just going to taste like the aluminum can instead of the actual beverage you want it to taste like. And you have to wonder, when it starts to take on a metallic taste, can it really be that good for you anymore? Well, never was good for you, but relatively speaking, it'd be worse for you. Anyway, I think I should soon end this video. Getting close to 3 o'clock. I forget if Star Trek Enterprise comes on at 3 or if it'll come on at 4. But it'll be on for hours and hours and hours. Which I can watch it on Netflix as well as on television. And I have it on DVD and even some of it on Blu-ray. So I can watch Star Trek Enterprise at any time. So I shouldn't worry about missing it. And I'm actually going to get ready to go hang out with some people later today, assuming they're still available, and all signs are nothing to contradict the idea. So there's that, and yay, getting out and doing activity. I won't be able to leave for a while, so I have time to get ready. So much for watching some Star Trek Enterprise. Well, I'll probably have it on in the background while I get ready. Yep. Phase pistols from Star Trek Enterprise. And yeah. And a phaser stun to the head as an anesthetic for dealing with or watching the ever painful Star Trek Discovery. Yep, phaser shot to the head. And by the way, to those who are confused, phasers and phase pistols are not the same thing. When people said, oh no, they have phasers too early in the Star Trek timeline, Enterprise is ruining everything. No, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. Also, disruptors are not the same thing either. And the phasers are significantly more sophisticated than the phase pistols. They're both particle beams. Well, people thought they had laser pistols back then. I'm not sure. I mean, that functionally is also a particle beam. And of course, people think, well, no, it's a beam of light. It's electromagnetic activity. It's like, yeah, but what you see on screen is not that. Therefore, it must be some sort of either plasma beam or particle beam being energized by a laser. Otherwise, it should be an invisible beam. Though, I suppose, technically, as it passes through the air, it could be turning the air into plasma. But then you would have shipboard weapons that were invisible in the vacuum of space. And anytime you see a laser weapon and you see the beam, most likely it's not consistent with how a laser would act. Which is actually why Star Trek came up with the term phaser. They were like, well, you know, people are going to be... It's only going to take people a little bit of time before they're telling us that lasers aren't going to do that. So, well, we better call our weapon something else. So whenever I see a laser in science fiction and it shoots a visible beam, especially if it's doing it in the vacuum of space, and especially if it happens to be Star Wars, and, you know, reference to Star Wars instead of Star Trek for a second there, I think, well, the weapon is powered by a laser. It's a laser weapon in the same way a car is a gas-powered vehicle. It's a gasoline engine. It's an engine powered by gasoline. It's a weapon. It's a weapon powered by a laser if it's a laser weapon. But if you see the beam streaking across the vacuum of space, and probably even if you see it streaking across through the air, though technically it could be converting the air to plasma, odds are it's either it's probably a plasma beam. Just that the plasma is heated up, activated, charged, been turned into plasma by a laser. The electrons in the plasma have been excited by a laser. Therefore, the beam is being generated by a laser, but the actual visual content of the beam is plasma. But the actual laser energy might actually be transmitted to the object, but there's also particles as well too. Actually, they could have decided to enhance the phase pistol over time. They could have indicated a variation of the phase pistol that was like bigger and bulkier and had like some sort of laser built into it that would have made the beam even more energetic. That would have been an idea that they could have done. They could have called it the laser phase pistol or something like that. Or they could have just referred to it as an enhanced phase pistol and indicate that the technology is going to evolve, that the beam is more and more generated by a laser with time. They could have done things like that, but the series never had time. We're not going to know what they're going to do. Some people got upset because the Romulan Wars were supposed to be fought with nuclear weapons, and somehow Enterprise changed that. And it's like, no, Enterprise did not change that. When the NX-01 launched, it had nuclear-powered torpedoes. It wasn't clearly stated to be nuclear on screen. They just called them their torpedoes. It was indicated they're probably called spatial torpedoes, meaning they're designed for space. But it's some sort of atomic, either thermonuclear or probably straight-up atomic, as in splitting an atom. Some form of atomic, or, well, nuclear and atomic are often interchangeable, but, you know, it's some form of nuclear explosion. A small nuclear explosion, but nonetheless a nuclear explosion. Because if they were going to arm a ship with torpedoes, it'd have to be enough to compete with the types of shielding and armor that other species would have. So you couldn't just put, like, a chemical-powered explosive or anything. It'd have to be something capable of generating a lot of energy. And by Star Trek standards, you know, a small nuke wouldn't be that much. Not when you have particle beams that can destroy mountains. And torpedoes that are even more devastating, you know. At least on alien ships that you'd have to contend with. And then in season 2, they indicated that Romulan mines had some sort of arming device on par with a spatial torpedo, which would indicate that both Earth's Starfleet and the Romulans were using some similar weapons technology, probably some form of atomic explosion. And then, even though the NX-01 and NX-02 got upgraded to the point that they could launch photonic torpedoes, other ships, I think, were still indicated to still use the older nuclear ones. So there would have been a lot of those active. A lot of noisy vehicles going past. A lot of those ships would have been active during the Romulan Wars. And really, if you got to mass-produce torpedoes, probably the photon torpedoes probably weren't the best to mass-produce at the time when it was a new technology. In fact, Star Trek Beyond, even though I'm not a big fan of the newer movies, showed that some of the ships did get upgraded to pulsed phase cannons. Some of the old ships from the time period of the Romulan Wars, but it also referenced some of them were still carrying the old spatial torpedoes, such as the Franklin was. So I never really felt it was inconsistent to introduce photonic torpedoes, and especially considering how simple and straightforward the photonic torpedoes would be. But mass producing them, you'd have to be mass producing something sophisticated enough to safely carry the antimatter charge. You know, it's kind of like that would be a far more delicate procedure than setting up a nuclear bomb. I mean, the you know, visible nuclear material in a nuclear bomb, I mean, there's conditions that it has to undergo to create a nuclear explosion. But a photonic torpedo in Star Trek, um, you know, a malfunction where the antimatter storage fails, well, then that antimatter is going to come in contact with matter, and you're going to have an explosion that's comparable to nuclear, but kind of more efficient, more efficiently destructive. So, yeah, I mean, if you have to mass produce a lot of weapons quickly, it would stand to reason that they would start using up their crude atomic weapons, as well as producing their newer photonic torpedoes, such as, for example, I mean, in Star Trek, when they came out with the quantum torpedoes. The Defiant class starships carried quantum torpedoes as their primary torpedo. The Sovereign class starships carried both quantum and photon torpedoes, and just about every other ship still relied on photon torpedoes. So I would say the same thing of the Enterprise era. The easier to mass produce, but slightly less powerful weapon still would go into mass production, still be used. Anyway, that's just me rambling on about Star Trek more. I don't really feel like I did a very articulate, a very good job of rambling on about Star Trek, but sometimes I'll do these videos and think, yeah, I got my thoughts out there, and I might get a few views. Other times I just don't. I'm not sure what I think of this episode. But I'd say it's pretty much over. This live video log is pretty much over. That's my thoughts on the most recent episode of Star Trek Discovery. I wrote some notes, but they're in the other room. And really, my impressions, what stayed with me for me to think about, yeah, I mean... Oh, I remember something else I thought about this episode of Discovery. I thought it was kind of odd. Like, they were, like, creating, like, an absurd, not absurd. Yeah, it was absurd. The whole thing's absurd, though. An unnecessary amount of drama by having... Oh, got a notification. Oh, Dakota sent me a message. Oh, cool. All right. It said it on that screen there, which I'm pointing to. I'm pointing to you, because it's also what I'm using as a camera. But I will check that message soon. Maybe Dakota has a suggestion on some time to hang out. I don't know. Hopefully I'll get around to hanging out with Dakota sometime soon. We never found the right amount of time. But anyway, I'm going to go check my messages soon. And... yeah, because the message just popped up on the screen there. And yeah, blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to finish this thing. Yeah, what else? What was it I was trying to say about Star Trek Discovery? It's Star Trek Discovery, so it's painful to remember. Yeah, it'll make more sense with a stun shot to the head to take away the pain and the thinking processes. Oh, excuse me. Burping up my syrupy crystal Pepsi. Crystal Cola. Crystal Pepsi. Dilithium Crystal Pepsi. What was I saying about? Yeah, oh yeah, the unnecessary drama of the character just wanted to speak to Pike, but deliberately didn't want to talk to their daughter. And despite the fact they were ramping up all the drama around whether, like, the fact that they held off on letting the two characters talk, it's like, what was the point in that? It was just like, it just felt unnecessary. It's like, what investment do I have on the idea that they're going to hold off on letting these two characters talk? I get why the character had issues with it, but I don't see what it did for the story, and it didn't really make a lot of sense. There's no reason why she couldn't be there too. I don't know, but it's Star Trek Discovery. It's not supposed to make sense, which is a shame. I've heard people say, and I agree with this one, it's that after watching Star Trek Discovery, I can now enjoy Star Trek Voyager as at least some competently made Star Trek, because compared to Star Trek Discovery, Voyager does seem competently made. I've also heard people say that Star Trek Discovery is causing people to like Enterprise more because there was a lot of hate for Enterprise when it first came out. And I technically disagree with that line because to me, Star Trek Discovery was the weakest Star Trek, and Enterprise actually was the strongest. I was really impressed with how the creators behind Star Trek came back from, like, the last season of Deep Space Nine was depressing, and Voyager throughout the entire series was mostly unimpressive. And then along came Enterprise, made by the same Star Trek people, but of course they were the same Star Trek that also gave me the Next Generation and some great seasons of Deep Space Nine as well too. Like, although some of the guys on Deep Space Nine were a different group of people that broke off from the people who were working on Next Generation, so there was some differences of the creative people behind them, but a lot of common creative forces behind them all. I was really impressed with how things improved with Enterprise. A lot of people also hated on it being a prequel. And I actually like the idea of prequels, especially with Star Trek, because as much as I do want to go forward, I also want to fill in the gaps in the series. Excuse me. And some people would say as soon as you do a prequel, you're retconning everything. You can't do a prequel because it's going to change stuff. Well, no, I disagree with that. But that said, very often when doing a prequel, it changes people's preconceptions, and often the writers make mistakes and change stuff. Excuse me. Yeah, but I was actually impressed with Enterprise because I was one of the people that was apathetic with Voyager. But I have been appreciating Voyager now that I've been watching Discovery. I've been enjoying Voyager's references to First Contact when they come up, just because it's a reference to a movie that I didn't actually enjoy all that much. I enjoyed it the first time I watched it, but unlike most other Star Trek movies, when I rewatched it lost all of its value to me. But I started to like First Contact more because Star Trek Enterprise was a follow-up of sorts to First Contact. So I look at First Contact as, well, I like the story on the planet with Zefram Cochrane. I'm kind of not so excited about the dull Borg action where the Borg are slowly taking over the ship. I don't really care much for that and the silly action scenes. Although I did like the Borg battle at the start of the episode. That was kind of cool action, although absurdly short. I liked what went on with Zefram Cochrane down on the planet, and I liked seeing the Vulcans. So there were things I really liked about First Contact. And it led to Enterprise, which makes me like it even more just by kind of like, well, this is like episode 0 of Star Trek Enterprise. So, makes me appreciate First Contact more, and Voyager had a few references to First Contact in retrospect. I find it interesting how it ties into other Star Treks, and they have that. I never cared for, what was it, the Prometheus class? What was it called? The one that splits into 3, the multi-vector mode, where the episode where they send the holographic doctor back to the Alpha Quadrant temporarily to send a message to people, and he ends up on a ship that's being captured by the Romulans, and it's that stupid ship that splits into 3 parts. Like some people say, when I was younger, I liked the idea, it seemed pretty kick-ass, but now that I'm older, I think it's lame. I never had that reaction. I was like, that ship is stupid. I was like, okay, I kind of get the point, like, when in Next Generation, when the Enterprise separated its saucer section, yeah, you could get the crew to safety when the other part of the crew would take on a dangerous battle, That made sense. You could send the ship to 2 places at once if necessary by separating the saucer section and leave it where it needs to be and then send the part capable of warp drive off somewhere else. The saucer separation concept made sense, but separating the ship into 2 targets kind of made sense in a battle for some situations, but for the most part, you know, you had all those collective weapons and shield generators all in the same spot. So in a way, it's also a different way to protect the ship, a different strategy. Like, separating the ship wasn't done all that often, and it made sense that it wasn't done all that often. But like the multi-vector attack mode just seemed silly to me. You know, that's my thoughts at the time. What was it called? Prometheus class? I'm not sure if it was called it, but I thought that ship was stupid. But that said, I can look back on it and appreciate, well, there you go. There's an episode where you see a bunch of ships from Deep Space Nine and this weird new Prometheus thing, and like, I start to appreciate some of the superficial things about Voyager that I never really appreciated before, even if I still feel like the stories are kind of weak by Star Trek standards. Now that I've been watching Discovery and seeing Star Trek get really screwed up, I appreciate Voyager more. And some people say it had the same effect on Enterprise, but I actually saw Enterprise getting more and more appreciation throughout its run and even after it was canceled. Like half a decade or more before Discovery came out. About a decade before Discovery came out, I found Enterprise was finally getting the appropriate amount of appreciation it got, because it got a lot of hate from the start. I find when people are ready to hate something, they'll hate on it bad, whether it's good or bad, and if people are ready to love something, whether it's good or bad, by default they'll almost love it or hate it, and then later in retrospect they'll be like, well, it wasn't that good, or it wasn't that bad. Remember how everybody loved Star Wars Episode 1 of Phantom Menace, and then a few years later everybody hated it? Yeah, well, Star Trek suffers from the same thing, I find. Like, when I saw Star Wars Episode 1 of Phantom Menace, I was like, what the hell was that? That sucked. Like, actually, that wasn't my reaction. My reaction is like, what the hell was that? That's what everybody loves? What? Why? I don't get it. It's not for me. It's too silly. I don't like it. Yeah, Star Wars Episode 1 did not win me over. The Phantom Menace is no Knights of the Old Republic. Knights of the Old Republic, yay! Phantom Menace, nah. But I actually found it easier to watch than Episode 7. I found Episode 7 kind of painful to get through. I loved Episode 4. People say, oh, well, it's a ripoff of Episode 4, but that's just their way of telling you that you're going to get more of the old stuff. Really? It felt like a bad ripoff of Star Wars Episode 4. Not as bad of a ripoff as Star Trek 2009, but you can take the basic flow of that same sort of story of Episode 4, Star Wars Episode 4, and you can recycle it as Episode 7, and that's not nearly as good as what they did in Star Wars Episode 4. Same story flow, concept, big super weapon, blah, 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 whatever. You can say it's a copy of the same story formula. But the story formula can be done good or bad. And I don't consider Episode 7 bad because it copied the formula of a good movie. I consider it bad because it copied the formula of a good movie and made it bad. That said, Star Trek 2009, the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, it also copied Star Wars Episode 4 and made an even badder movie than Episode 7. But, whatever. Enterprise, I found, was finally getting some respect over time. I found like some people went online and they just went online to hate the people that liked Enterprise and just hate the show by default and look for the most absurd little things to nitpick, which no Star Trek before ever could have stood up to those standards. Which I was right along with a lot of people complaining about how Voyager's quality was a step down in the quality control that was Star Trek. But I didn't hate Voyager, but I was a complainer that, that it seemed like Voyager was a step down in quality. It felt like lazy and bad choices were made. Felt very network. It felt like they were just serving the network. making a very network show that wasn't really concerned about being a great Star Trek show. With Enterprise, I didn't have that feeling at all. I was delightfully surprised and impressed with Enterprise. I loved how season 1 gave a more slower feeling. Like, I like it when a show takes its time to make us feel like we're there, to make the world feel real, to feel like the story, to take time to make it seem like this is a world where people are getting used to space travel. And while it is a Star Trek show, this one had the show where this one was a show where the gravity plating could fail. The airlocks felt like they were a real idea that was actually holding in the atmosphere and not just a prop. You know, this was the one that felt real. And humans' relationships with Vulcans, you could kind of look back to the original series and see how that relationship hadn't really developed a whole lot of trust yet, even though they were close allies. And you'd have like these little moments that were interesting that I wanted. I wanted to see people camping out on a strange new world for the first time. And you got a lot of that in season 1, but you also got a lot of action when they realized, holy shit, we're going to have to put weapons on this ship to protect it from Nausicaan pirates and people who want to interfere with the timeline, and just random aliens that turn out to be far more hostile than we were expecting to deal with. You know, like they had like some great action moments too. I really loved season 1 of Star Trek Enterprise. And when season 2 started off, it felt like more the same but weaker. The first half of season 2 I liked, just not as much as season 1. But the second half of season 2, I felt like they hit their stride and were doing really good in the second half of season 2. And season 3 had dull moments, but overall, season 3 was at the point where I realized it's not just one of my favorite Star Treks. For sure, this is my favorite Star Trek. I loved how they had a full, long season arc in season 3. And a little bit after it started to slow down a bit, get a little bit dull on average compared to what you had gotten used to from season 1 and the later half of season 2. You know, it felt like they might be working their way into a rut, but the characters were like around the Xindi. I really liked the Xindi. And the weird, lonely story arc of them being like this one ship in that incredibly dangerous situation, you know, being needed to do what they were going to do. I really loved season 3. And then could they beat season 3? Yeah, they got season 4. Season 4 was like one big love letter to Star Trek itself. They dealt with the augments in a way that even tied it into the ancestry of Data on the Next Generation. Talk about tying together like some of the greatest mythos of the Next Generation and the original series. And then they did the Klingon forehead thing and even tied that to the previous augment storyline. They revealed Section 31, not to the public, but the realization that there are people working behind the scenes at Starfleet right from the beginning of Starfleet. I mean, that was probably even the best usage of Section 31. I mean, and then you had the Mirror Universe episode, and then you had like the Terra Prime episodes, the 2-parters. I mean, what a way to end Star Trek on. Basically, with Terra Prime, the bad guys were the humans, but they were the aspect of humanity that Star Trek has always talked about people overcoming. Repeatedly throughout Star Trek, you'd have a human character looking back at humanity in the past and reminding the audience, without breaking the fourth wall, but having these moments that were meant to remind the audience that Star Trek is about having a positive future. Well, here you had Enterprise, which is a prequel series. The Terra Prime episodes, they literally made some of the worst characteristics of humanity be the adversary. It was like Star Trek fighting to become Star Trek. It's like the perfect prequel, like the perfect love letter to Star Trek itself you had with Season 4 of Star Trek Enterprise. And I also loved when they launched the NX-02. I wanted to see more of the NX-02. I just fucking loved it when you had both the NX-01 and the NX-02 on scene. I mean, that's more of a generic action. Actually, my favorite action scene in any Star Trek show, I would say, and it does involve either phaser fire or phase cannon fire, and I actually really liked how they did that scene where they had like the two NX-class starships in Season 4 of Enterprise merge their warp fields so they could fix the NX-01 at high warp without its warp field collapsing. And when they got the two ships so close and they ran the grappler lines between them, and then they sent like Tucker across from one ship to the next, and I fucking love that scene. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I just ultimate praise for that episode. Yeah, Star Trek, and I found like a lot of people online either went online to hate Enterprise, like it got a lot of negative publicity. But that said, I found some people talked about it reasonably, and I found a lot of people were like, you know what, my favorite show was the original series, but you know what, I think Enterprise is my second favorite. Like, you'd see love for it, and usually the people that loved it labeled it as their second favorite. Like, I saw some people saying, well, my favorite was Deep Space Nine, but, you know, my second favorite is Enterprise. Myself, it actually became my favorite, and I had a hard job to pick between Next Generation or Deep Space Nine as my second favorite. But, yeah, I mean, all hail Enterprise. I mean, that one was the sort of like Star Trek's love letter to itself, which sounds pretty narcissistic, but you know what? When you have that much history and you're doing a prequel, fuck yeah. Fucking A, Enterprise. Fucking A. A to go, Enterprise. But yeah, I mean, with Star Trek Discovery, I mean, now we're seeing really how you can mess up a Star Trek show. And I was going to end this video. I keep ranting on about Star Trek, and it's time for me to end this video. And I think scanning the internet for signs of it's time to end the video. Yeah. Alright. Okay, that's not good. It's shorted out. That's not how it's supposed to turn off. I tried to turn it off, but it overloaded and shorted out. Let's see if I can get that to fix itself. I don't know. Alright. There. There. That's how it's supposed to turn off. That's how it works. There. There. There we go. I wiggled the on-off power switch and then turned it back on and then off, and I don't know. Anyway, I think it's time for me to end this video. Time for me to go off, and you know, I got a lot of caffeinated liquid in my system and some sugary liquid in my system too. I'm gonna put this back in the fridge. Not back in the fridge. There's just stuff in it over there. So, time to go Jaloja! Time to go fire the phase cannon down the porcelain wormhole. Jaloja time! Yeah, alright, so I'm going to end this. I'm going to end this thing. Well, if you managed to get to the end, thank you! Wow, how did you do that? You look for me on, well, here I am on YouTube. There's also DTube, BitChute, and BitTube, and DLive to a lesser degree. I plan to put more on DLive eventually. I find it hard to upload videos there right now, but I think they're going to improve with time. And, subscribe to me on Subscribestar if you wanna do that sort of thing, or even just look to see what I post on Subscribestar. Excuse me. Wow. That's a rude way to end the episode. Alright, ending it for real. Alright. Gotta end this for real. And my leg hurts. I've been standing on it too long the wrong way. I'm stretching my leg while I do this. And I was actually gonna end this. Alright, really ending this. Thank you and good night.